everyone, my name is Caroline Griffin. I am Director of Operations for the Riot organization. Thank you for joining us at the Riot Lunch and Learn series, the place where we feature all of Riot's partners. Super excited to have Gary and Aaron from Zeero here with us today to talk to us about DevSecOps, key elements and industry trends. Just a couple of quick reminders before we get started. This session is being recorded. It will be posted to Riot's YouTube channel and then shared out on the meetup group where you registered for this event. If you have any questions throughout the event, please do place those in the chat box and we'll make sure they get answered. There will be a couple polling questions during the session. So you can use obviously the poll feature, or if you're more comfortable, please use the chat box to answer those questions. And then the best way to use to view today's presentation is in speaker view. That'll give you a nice big view of the presentation and then the speaker. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Gary and Aaron. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Caroline. I really appreciate it. And thank you for the introduction. And to those that were able to join, thank you for taking the time out today. I know, there's probably just a little bit of Zoom burnout these days in the world, and just trying to get on everybody's calendar is always a bit challenging, but hopefully very soon we'll be able to actually do this in person with you and some future individuals as well. So again, just thanks for taking the time, and hopefully everybody's out there staying safe. So as Caroline mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about DevSecOps, kind of some industry trends and some challenges that maybe go along with those trends as well. We can't always do everything at once. So, kind of how do we make sure that we don't take off more than we can handle, right? So let's go ahead and get started here. All right, so. All right, as Caroline mentioned, my name is Gary Shaffer. I'm founder of Cornerstone Technical Solutions. Our product is actually Zeero. We actually pushed this through the Riot Startup Accelerator program as well a few months back. I've got 17, I think 18 years now after this year of technology experience, a bit in the public sector for quite a few years in the beginning of my career, with DoD, FBI, FEMA, and then kind of moved into Red Hat and Cisco in the commercial industry. So I have a pretty broad spectrum of infrastructure early on in my career, and now to multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and more on the application development side of the house, more the DevOps approach in this industry. And with me today is also Aaron Fowler. He's our account manager for Cornerstone, and if you haven't heard from him before, I'm sure you probably will, but he'll also be in the chat room, kind of monitoring the questions. If you guys have any, he'll be there to answer anything you may have. On that note, just a little bit of housekeeping, if we can, depending on the size group we have here. It seems like we could probably get away with this. Let's see if we can interact a little bit. I know these can be a bit boring sometimes, but just grab a coffee, sit back, relax, turn on your camera if appropriate. We like to see some faces, whether in person or virtual. That's always nice. And if you feel like you have anything to add, feel free to either raise your hand or just say something in the chat, and we'll go ahead and call on you to unmute. Aaron will kind of poke me over here. He's in the same room as me to kind of allow you to speak up a little bit. And as Caroline mentioned, you will see a little voting icon as well in some of the slides, and that's when a poll will be posted to the chat as well. So just trying to keep it a little bit interactive. As far as Cornerstone as a whole, what we do is kind of get the architecture out of the way a little bit, but we are solutions focused veteran-owned company. Been in business since 2012, and really our main motto at Cornerstone is service with integrity. We're not here to try to give people things they don't need, right? We actually want to provide people with the things that they do. And we want you to try to do something right the first time. And, sometimes we can come into, and, if somebody's struggling with their DevOps strategy or some type of integration or something like that, we can always help come in and kind of right the ship, if you will. But as you see here, our main focus areas revolve around pretty much everything, around the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud strategies, DevSecOps, and of course, security is a big part of that as well. So we cover pretty broad spectrum as far as expertise goes. These are just a few of the partnerships and technologies that we do work on. Not an exhaustive list, but these are just some of the key partners and technologies that we have in our current stack right now, especially as it relates to Zeero. So the flow of this presentation today, we're going to go ahead and try to define DevSecOps. Some of you may know what this means. Some of you may have an idea what it means if you've already have a good grasp on what DevOps actually is. If you're in the startup world, maybe you haven't ever heard of it, right? So we'll go ahead and kind of define what DevOps is and what it was actually meant to set out to accomplish, and then kind of add in the security aspect of that and why DevSecOps exists and what that definition actually means. And then along with some of these trends that we're going to talk about as well, we will talk about the challenges that those provide and two overarching solutions that can help address some of those. All right, so as far as DevOps is concerned, there was a time, if you've been in the industry for any length of time, developers, operations, we never really liked talking to each other very much, at least in the past, right? Operations engineers would complain about developers not right-sizing their applications properly and taking up too many resources, and the devs in return would complain about ops, not getting things done fast enough or not providing what they need. And there was always this lack of communication kind of going back and forth. And really the idea behind DevOps was really to create a framework that can facilitate this communication and maybe the working together just a little bit closer, so it should have been this framework where plans, processes, and procedures kind of blended the responsibilities and capabilities of the dev group and the operations team themselves. And if you're in startup mode right now, you may not have devs and ops, you're probably doing both, which actually may be a better scenario to actually try to try to adopt a DevOps or DevSecOps strategy when you're in that mode, because you're kind of blending responsibilities already. You're doing more than one thing. But a lot of more established organizations, kind of fall in this trap where things were once siloed and then people buy a bunch of tools and then they're like, oh, we're now a DevOps shop. And that's not the case. Just because you have the tools in place doesn't necessarily mean you're DevOps. But essentially, what DevOps was out there, to try to accomplish was getting engineers and developers kind of working together. Right. And that's really the common goal, is to facilitate that communication, break down some barriers, and get, maybe some similar processes and procedures that maybe overlap, and even tools that overlap, get people actually using those things together. So our favorite source that we always like to reference, which you always got in trouble for in college, from Wikipedia, right? But according to Wikipedia, DevOps is a set of practices that combines software development and IT operations. Basically everything we just said, right? It aims to shorten the system's development lifecycle and provide continuous delivery with high software quality. DevOps is complementary with agile software development, which most of you are probably familiar with. And several DevOps aspects came from agile itself. So that was, again, the goal behind what is DevOps. And again, a lot of people say, yep, we're doing DevOps. And then we come in and we say, no, you're not. And we usually have to have this conversation, which we'll talk about later on the solution side of the house, how to address some of that, and help that journey be a little less painful. So those that had DevOps kind of there, right, and working in that organization, DevSecOps is exactly what you think it is, right? You're adding security into the mix. So imagine, again, if it was hard enough for developers and operations to work together, or even those two mentalities to work together, why would you want to even add security into the mix? If you are a startup, you may not have experienced this yet, but the communication between, even dev and ops and security, they kind of tend to alienate each other a little bit, right? Because security is always saying, hey, we need this. And, dev and ops are saying, well, we can't do this, but no one's really explaining why. And there's usually a lack of detail about what's being asked for and maybe why something can't be done or shouldn't be done. And it's just basically security coming at dev and ops saying, oh, well, you have to do this without giving any reason why. And then dev and ops are complaining because, you know, they're being told to do something that's either super difficult or whatever the case is. So how do we get, you know, how do we understand though that security is probably the most important task of both the developer and the operations engineer? And how do we learn to work together a little bit more as a team? So how do we facilitate communication, number one, but even the tool sets that we use, there's some overlapping things there that we can try to use to work better together. So if security has a requirement, let's define what that requirement is, and then together work on the actual solution to accomplish that definition, right? So to define DevSecOps really quickly, it's the mantra to make everyone accountable for security, right? So we always talk about shifting security left or shifting left, right? Further into the development process and even into your deployment process at the deploy stage. There's certain things that need to happen more so on the ops side than the dev side. But how do we create a process that can facilitate security at every step in that pipeline if you're on the dev side, or in the ops side where things get deployed? How do we potentially automate some of that, so some of those requirements, so that when security does do their scans, whether at the application layer or the cloud, you know, virtual machine layer, container layer, whatever that is, how do we try to bring everybody coming together and just make everyone accountable for that process? So some current trends that are happening in the market right now, and these are just a few, you know, this is obviously not an exhaustive list, but a few of the things that are really starting to happen right now is cloud native DevOps. So you think, if you're not familiar with it, you know, things like your CI/CD pipelines, your software development process, a lot of that's being handled in a cloud native fashion now, right? You're no longer developing on your local machine anymore. You might be using a virtual instance or a development container that sits somewhere else. And those processes and procedures from your Trello boards or your Azure DevOps boards or GitLab or what have you, right? Your whole planning process is now fully integrated with when I commit code and how pipelines get kicked off and how automation happens. And this whole DevOps process is happening in more in a cloud native fashion. And there are some complexities with that as well. Another big thing that's happening right now is serverless. So you think function as a service, a lot less reliant on operating systems and having containerization nodes or Docker or Kubernetes, those types of things. Which may or may not sound familiar, but this serverless architecture is just, hey, I only need to run a function when I need to call it. And on the back end of that, those are still considered a containerized type application in a way. But again, this is just one of the things that's happening right now. And how do we secure those functions as a service or that serverless type architecture? Zero touch automation is something that's happening right now. So how do I create automation to manage the entire application lifecycle or that entire lifecycle of that code, from the time I commit that to the time it actually gets deprovisioned on the back end? How do we just do zero touch automation at that point and even remediate things on the fly? You know, so kind of auto remediation can kind of be looked at in the same way, where I'm monitoring for something to happen. If something fails, I have some automation already created to go handle that issue. And there's tools out there that come to mind, like Sentry or even like a Datadog or something like that, that can help with those things. AI and machine learning, we're seeing a lot more of this in our conversations, especially with some different big data initiatives with some customers that we have. There's a lot of data out there, but how do we actually make sense of it? So AI and ML are becoming big right now. And then kind of going from right to left here on the bottom, you know, monitoring and recovery automation, that kind of ties into the Zeero automation as well. Service mesh, DevSecOps platform availability is starting to become a thing. And we'll kind of talk about that here as well. And just microservices architecture. And with microservices architecture, you know, we have a lot of customers either going from a monolithic application to a containerized, you know, more self-sufficient part of that application, right? That is not reliant on any other services. That's a true microservice. That's a whole other topic, I think, that we could probably present on just microservices architecture by itself. But again, there's still a lot of customers either, trying to decide, do I migrate my monolith to something in a microservice, or do I just create something brand new and just migrate the data over later on? So again, these are 8 of the big areas that we see a lot of trends right now. IoT is another one that's not even listed here. I thought about adding that in here as well. And there's even more than this. I guess just real quick, whoever's on the phone right now, is there something that you're currently working on? And feel free to speak up. Is there something that you are currently working on that you think is, maybe not listed here, or something that is probably coming down the pike that you can kind of see in the industry? Because I think we have a couple industry folks on here as well, if anyone wants to speak.
I don't know if this is on topic. I'm Rich Powers, but I work in IoT, but like hardware, software, mobile to the cloud, analytics, sort of IoT. And so the same thing you say about dev and ops people being at war, multiply that by 100, and hardware and software going to war. But the big question is there someplace I can go and read up, et cetera, about the link between like roots of trust on hardware and software and how it is that you manage across that? It's probably out of the scope of this talk, but thank you.
No, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, and to your point, once you start talking about IoT, that's its own conversation, because I mean, you're usually talking about a multi-cloud architecture. You're talking geographic differences at that point as well. Not to mention, now you're also dealing with the hardware aspect of that, right? So whatever those triggers are on the thing you're monitoring to begin with, and then who gets notified and when, and where those notifications go. And like you said, mobile app platforms. IoT kind of brings every single one of these things that you see here kind of together, and it makes it, to your point, that much harder to manage and try to architect properly. We actually are talking with another customer right now that they're a global company at the moment, and they're working on a big IoT initiative at the moment. So I understand your point. There's a lot there to kind of grasp once you start talking IoT. And yes, it would be a totally separate topic on its own, I think, as well. Yeah, Joe, do you want to? I saw you raise your hand as well.
Yeah. So the only thing I would add is that what I'm beginning to see is kind of a hybrid across a lot of these different containers, if you will, where in the post-pandemic world, as companies are looking to divest themselves of data centers, moving a lot of their data migration into the cloud and making it much more operational, and using like modernization and other types of techniques to make it more accessible. I think if you were going to blend, that's probably a story that's told throughout those containers, but I think it's a very relevant story in the world of DevSecOps today.
I agree. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we, like you said, just even migrating to containers is one thing. And to your point, we could have another conversation about that as well. I mean, just getting it containerized is one thing, but actually doing things efficiently once it's in the cloud is a whole other thing, because you don't want to lock yourself into a cloud per se. And everything that we try to accomplish with our customers is, I don't like vendor lock-in, so we try to be as agnostic as possible. So just being able to control your cloud costs with things like that as well, that can easily spin up and spin down is another topic as well. So yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. Good points all the way around. And thank you guys for actually speaking up, because the last time we did this, nobody spoke. So I really appreciate that. All right. So based on what we just talked about, right, there were six main things I think that kind of come out of what we just discussed. Was, from a trend perspective, right? Those were very kind of technology specific, what you just saw on the last slide, but really they kind of boil down, I think, to these 6 different things. Is the rise of DevOps itself. I mean, we've been talking about DevOps for what, 7, 8 years, something like that. I think when we looked it up, it was 2013 technically when it became a thing. And, we've been talking for DevOps for a long time, and, it's still a topic of conversation, because a lot of people started to head down a journey in one direction, and then they either realized 2-3 years into it, oh crap, we didn't implement this correctly. Maybe we need to rethink it and take a step back. And then there's some people that actually don't make that smart decision and take a step back and maybe readdress it. They just keep going. And that's always a much harder conversation to have. But again, the rise of DevOps itself is causing a lot of these conversations that we just saw, the AI and ML, the process and procedure changes that need to happen with new modern technology that's coming out. And that kind of leads to the second thing, which is technology adoption in general. We talk about containerization technologies. There's multiple solutions for that. There's raw Kubernetes, there's GKE in Google, there's AKS in Azure, there's EKS in Amazon. Which one do I choose? And do I choose Red Hat OpenShift versus this? And I think every one of those has its place. And like I said, we always try to avoid vendor lock-in where possible, or where it makes sense, or at least have a multi-cloud strategy, at least two of those options together. But again, technology adoption itself brings about some challenges. Security is at the forefront of everyone else's mind right now, especially once you start talking about technology adoption and the microservices aspect. Kind of the more you split out an application, technically your attack footprint kind of increases a little bit. So how do we kind of control that in some way that works well? And then talent acquisition and automation are kind of together here as well. So as we adopt more technology, we need different expertise. What's the right way to go acquire talent when needed and if needed in the first place? Or do we automate something first before we go hire? Or do you do both, right? And we'll kind of talk about that as well. So with every one of these, it can lead to a bit of stress, to say the least. With so many tools on the market, so many options. I mean, everything is happening right now at breakneck pace. What do we do? Where do we start? And again, there's some challenges here I think we need to address. So I split this up into 3 slides. I'm going to try to cover 2 of those per slide. So the rise of DevOps and technology adoption, I think it leads to 3 main things. Number one that we see right now, especially when talking to DevSecOps potential customers, and we're having these conversations, is tool overload. What generally ends up happening is one developer has one way of doing their things, or this team has one way, and then ops has this other thing that they want you to use to either do the deployment or use for scanning security and all of that. And really the developers get bogged down by just configuring tools. And that's not what you should be doing. You should not be focusing on 20, 30 different tools just to help get the job done. You should be focusing on your code. So how do we kind of get out of the tool? Because at the end of the day, the tool is a means to an end. How do we get out of the tool and focus on the outcome and let the developers truly focus on what matters, focus on what they enjoy doing in the first place, which is creating the next best thing, right, for your company or your organization. So how do we get this tool overload thing kind of out of the way? How do we consolidate and try to reduce as much overlap where possible? With that also comes some hidden costs with technology. Again, if you have your pipeline, but you have container security scans, you've got static code analysis, load testing, all of those things, there could be some hidden costs in there just to get things integrated. How much time are your developers or engineers actually spending just getting things to talk to each other? There's one customer we have where they spent over a year developing a complete end-to-end orchestration platform that worked for them. So it was completely custom. Granted, this is a very large FSI customer, and Red Hat Consulting is involved and everything else. And it took over a year to build that platform. They used it for 2 years, and now they're in the process of building version 2 of that. And this is a team of 40, 50 developers, right, working on this thing. So not only are they having to do their day jobs, but then also create this massive orchestration platform that they're going to end up developing on. There's probably a better way to do that, most likely. And with all of that comes the complexity of it, right? So just, one saying we have internally is with innovation comes complexity. So the easier a tool is, or an easier a service is to consume, all the things on the back end to make that happen just got really complex. And so to maintain something got really complex. So how do we make all these tools actually work together and better? Does anybody have any comments on that slide before I move on to the next one? Okay. Moving on. All right, so security and microservices, we kind of touched on this a second ago, but as you develop your multi-cloud strategy, whether it's Azure, AWS, Google, some private cloud or something small, whatever that is, there's going to be a lot of complexity there, and also security things to think about. How two clouds talk to each other, who's maintaining that, what endpoints should I be monitoring or shouldn't I be worried about? And if you're really small, like a startup or a mid-market company, what can I afford to do really comes into play, and so just try to focus on those attack surfaces that make sense for your organization, and just try to protect what's most important first, and then start kind of expanding that shield a little bit more across other endpoints that could be compromised, right? Don't try to do everything at once, right? Because security at times is not usually a very it's cost effective in the long term, right? But to initially implement something as a startup, I know it can be difficult. So how do we try to address those in the most efficient way possible? And then application performance monitoring, for the microservices themselves becomes a big topic of conversation. It's always good to know where things are slowing down, why they're slowing down, and also if there is a security attack happening, a lot of times APM will pick something like that up. And you kind of get an idea of where are my bottlenecks, how efficient can I make my application, and those types of things. This was a little statistic here. I forgot I had that in here. So there was a study done by Google, actually, where they interviewed, I think it was 30,000 developers. I'll have to go back, but we can send you guys the link on this. But these were some of the statistics that came out of this, and this was blended across startups, mid-market, enterprise, and everything. And this kind of caught us off guard a little bit, especially when it came to security, and even just DevOps practices in general. But 56% of code changes, 56% of the participants said that code changes take a week or more. We actually have a belief that, you can actually get to that deploying at least once a day, right? So, really do that CI/CD or the CD portions, continuous deployment. So the fact that it takes a week or more, 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks to make a change, we need to try to shrink that time down a little bit. The second one there was really the one that stood out was 75% of organizations had no automated security testing whatsoever. That was a big one. That, even if you test it, if they didn't have the automated security testing, then they probably didn't have any way to automatically remediate either, right? So automation really becomes a big play here, which kind of leads to that 31% on the very right there. It says 31% of participants cited having time and budget constraints to even worry about automation. If I remember correctly, in the mid-market and smaller organizations, that number was a lot higher because they just did not have the time to go automate things. So between the security and the automation, those are big things that we really should be focusing on probably first if you already have something in place. If you're starting from the ground up, it's a good thing to address now and prioritize. And then the last two here kind of come down to talent acquisition. I know CFOs worry about this, and even IT managers, architects, really with the experience that's needed now, right? We just don't need an engineer that understands Linux and then a separate guy that understands Windows and containers on both of those. We kind of need somebody that can blend the spectrum a little bit, more of like an SRE type talent. But with that comes a rising cost. So kind of understanding when to hire or when to contract out, or when to scale, right? Maybe you contract to scale, but then you hire to maintain what you have, right? And those are different strategies for different companies and whatever your business model is. But those are different approaches that you could take. It's kind of knowing when am I going to scale? When do I need to hire talent? Those types of things. And really the big goal, the big thing in that is that no one is going to ever be an expert in everything. So just come to that realization now. Nobody's going to be perfect. There's so many tools, so much happening, but if you can get someone that at least understands concepts in that domain. So if it's security automation or, cloud management, kind of that hybrid model, they might be an expert in Azure, but they have no clue about AWS. Chances are they can pick up the AWS side. You don't have to go hire somebody for that. So again, that just kind of understanding up front, nobody's going to be an expert in everything, especially these days. I don't think there are any more, well, there are specialists, but they're becoming fewer and farther between at the moment. The more coverage aspect, technology and people both, right? Kind of back to my previous point, they need to cover more than one area. There are so many steps that need to be implemented into your process, your development process, your pipelines, and within the business itself, that when you invest in technology and people, it needs to be able to do more than one thing, right? In most cases, there are certain things that are very pointed solutions for different things, but it's good to find a solution that can touch multiple. Like for instance, just one thing that just comes off the top of my head, because we deal with it a lot, is not to throw any particular vendors under the bus or anything, but there are vendors that do very well with automation tools that work for their networking devices or their systems, but they don't touch anything else. Whereas something like, an Ansible, a Puppet, or Chef, right? Something like that, doesn't care what your end vendor is at that point, right? How do we automate multiple things, not just networking devices, but everything else, my cloud resources, my on-premise things, my Linux tasks that need to be done, right? How do I get more coverage out of one technology versus needing a pointed solution for each vendor's thing, right? Widget, whatever that is. So how do I make better decisions on that front? So again, just try to get more coverage out of your tools and your people. And then really the last one there is automate or hire. For us, we like to say do both, right? Automation doesn't take people's jobs away. I know a lot of people have heard that before, but automation allows your people to scale their abilities and capabilities in the first place. You can get away with, one or two people if they know how to automate the mundane tasks that they get stuck doing every single day, right? Let that, that first engineer in your startup understand automation and how to use it to their advantage and your advantage, so you can scale your capabilities through automation without having to make the next big hire, right? Whatever that is. There may be some differing opinions on that. Please feel free to chat those in there, but that's kind of our standpoint on it, right? Try to automate first before going out and trying to hire the next SRE or try to hire your next architect. Let's talk about what your capabilities are first, how to make those existing people that are on your team more efficient, and then figure out what your DevOps team or DevSecOps team is actually going to look like. Any questions there or any comments about that, about talent and the automation side? Okay. All right, so some potential solutions here. And there, really, we've only listed two that should cover the majority of these. I think the biggest one is going to come down to, as soon as I can click on it, there we go. So this is one of my favorite quotes from one of the Red Hat architects that I know, that I've known for a few years now. He actually taught at a Red Hat summit, and we've actually created a workshop for this as well, which we can talk about at a later date. But this is something that we use in our automation workshop with CIOs and IT managers and everything. And the first thing you need to do as an organization is cast your vision, get everybody in the same boat, sailing in the same direction. A lot of times what we run into, and I'd say it's probably 80% of the time, we're walking into established companies and organizations. And that's probably a little bit different with the Riot community, right? Because these are from the ground up companies, so they're in a great place to take recommendations and actually run with it. But a lot of times we run into organizations that like, oh yeah, we're doing DevOps, or hey, we're gonna go buy Red Hat Ansible automation platform and we're gonna do automation. Well, a lot of times we get in there, they procured it, we've gone in, we're going to do the implementation and the integrations with their ITSM tools, their CMDBs, all of that. And half of their engineers didn't even know it was coming. A lot of them don't want it because they like doing things their own way. And there's just a lot of friction, a ton of friction, so getting your vision, either as the manager or the CIO or CTO, whatever that is, getting that vision cast and then actually communicating it is the number one thing that needs to happen first. Don't even talk about technology. If you're going to come talk to us, we're going to ask you, what is your vision as your startup? Like, what is your purpose as a company? But then from a technology perspective, what is our vision going to be? Like, what are we automating? What are we doing? Get everybody, you have to get buy-in from your team. And that's a lot harder to do if you're already established. The good thing though, when there is friction, you can generally tell after that who's going to end up staying on the team as things move forward and who's probably not going to work out. I know it's a harder conversation to have, but it's better to figure that out during this cast your vision process than figure it out after you've already said, nope, we're going to do it. And you got a bunch of people upset at you. So getting that communication is really key and figuring out where you're going to go as a company. This will take care of a lot of your decision makers, from your managers on down, as far as, okay, if this is the vision we're heading, we need to have a multi-cloud strategy. Here are the technologies that can help us. Here's what our security posture is going to be, right? Get security involved in this cast your vision thing too. Get all of that communicated up front, then choose what technologies you're going to use. Don't ever take the technology first approach. It doesn't work generally, 9 times out of 10. Once you have those things kind of defined, then the next thing, and this is actually my last slide actually coming up, is, especially for either a greenfield project or, if you're wanting to, either greenfield or completely take a step in the right direction with your approach, from a development process standpoint, find a solution that can get your development process at least on rails, if that makes sense. Get your team developing in a standard way. The applications will always be deployed the same way. And, we have customers that say, yes, we do CI/CD, we have pipelines, we have a good app dev process. Then a lot of times we go in there, we say, okay, well, do you actually have load testing? Do you do static code analysis? Do we do container compliance scanning, right? A lot of them say no. And a lot of times it's because of budget constraints, which I understand, because all the tools required to make that happen on their own, if they're not integrated, can cost a lot in actual licensing costs and actual integration costs. So I understand that, but see if there is a platform out there that can help you get 40 to 50% of the way there, or even 60% of the way there, and then focused on those last mile integrations later, right? A lot of people, like I mentioned, that one FSI customer with the 40, 50 developers, and they created their own platform. They created a little bit more expanded version of this. There were a lot more steps in their pipeline. Here, they probably went through 20, 30 steps before it actually hit to deploy into a Kubernetes cluster of their choice. But they DIY'd it. And the cost of that is astronomical to do it yourself, or have a consulting firm come in and get you from 0 to 100. Maybe find a platform that can get you, again, from 0 to 50, and then focus on that last 50% as you go, or the last 20%. So one of the things that we did as a company, and this is where Zeero comes in, and this is the only slide you'll see with Zeero on it, other than the introduction slide, is we took a look at this and said, okay, our consulting business really revolved around just deploying technology. So we would work with 3 or 4 different vendors and go deploy it, integrate them, and then leave. There was really no value to that at the end of the day. We never got to talk to their development team really about how to develop better, right? How to help them just bring their code and focus on their code. We weren't talking about how to expand this whatsoever. Then it was just very much a service engagement, right? We were just a set of hands to go make something happen that they didn't have the time to do. So the concept that came up was the secure software factory. And the secure software factory, which I probably should have had a slide in on this, the secure software factory was created, or that concept was kind of created within the civilian government world with a partner of ours up in DC. And their goal in life was to bring the correct vendor to every one of these steps that you see here. So if you need unit testing, oh, here's 3 or 4 vendors you can work with. Here's code quality analysis. Oh, here's 3 or 4 vendors you can work with. And their goal at the end of the day was to sell software, which is great. So the idea of a secure software factory came in and said, hey, what tools do I need to make every one of these steps happen? We took that and said, okay, how do we actually, again, get away from just deploying those individual technologies and actually getting them all integrated together? So we took a snapshot of what their secure software factory was. And out of the box with our Zeero product, we said, how can we get you to day zero faster? Hence the name Zeero. And this is what we ended up creating. So these tools that you see down here in the box, and there's actually more that can be implemented, but we basically plugged in the factory, which is the tools, into the pipelines, which are the steps that your software takes to actually deploy into production. And every single one of these tools talks to each other. Out of the box, you get multi-factor authentication, you get some security things built in. A lot of the work that your engineer would have to take 3, 6, 9, 12 months to do on their own, depending on how large you really want to make this, we can do in about 30 minutes. And we have it built into a bring your own cloud model. So you can deploy this in either Azure, GKE, AWS is coming soon. We're currently working on a GovCloud option as well for those that need more security, those types of things. But again, this was kind of the starting point. How can we get people just that little bit closer to day zero, just kind of out of the box, and get them, again, just to the point where they can focus on their code? And really our idea is just to start right now, right? Start correctly right now. So again, that's really it, I believe. Yeah. I hope this was a little bit helpful, right? And again, I think the solution side is really around the communication and developing your own platform or finding something that works. Doesn't have to be Zeero. However, good luck finding one. We recently, again, this Zeero product did go through the Riot Accelerator program, and there's been, I think, 1 or 2 competitors now that have finally come out of the woodwork. But again, just find what works for you. That's really the key to try to make it happen. So any questions, any comments, anything you would like to add, any complaints? I'm open to that too. So I think we hit it right on the money, 45 minutes.
Great presentation, Gary. Very informative.
Thank you.
Any questions? Like Gary said, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like.
Yeah, I think we got a small enough group here for that. I think we're good.
All right, well, we'll close it out. Please do reach out to Gary if you do think of any questions. We appreciate you joining us today, and thank you, Aaron. If you need help getting in touch, you can always reach out to me, Caroline@riot.org. As a reminder, this was recorded, will be posted to Riot's YouTube channel, and then posted to the meetup group around this event. So thanks, y'all. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good one, guys.